Does your radio station have its own water well, or do you pay somebody else for water? What about your own septic tank system out in the back, or do you pay for sewage service? What about trash pickup? Do you pay for that, or do you burn your trash out in the back 40? Well, what if your tower lights you paid for by the month, and they were guaranteed to work all the time, and no surprise charges, they just always worked? Well, that's possible. That's Tower Lights as a Service, and Chuck Kelly is here to tell us about it on TWiRT.
This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Broadcasters General Store, with outstanding service, savings, and support. Online at bgs.cc. By Broadcast Bionics, with the Bionics Studio, including talk show control, social media, and visual radio. Broadcast Bionics brings exceptional audience engagement to radio and TV. By Angry Audio. Audio problems disappear when you get angry at angryaudio.com. By Nautel, worry-free transmission you can count on with outstanding control, reliability, efficiencies, and Nautel's unmatched 24/7 customer support. Online at nautel.com. And by Max Connect Wireless, prioritized high-speed internet service designed for transmitter sites and remote broadcasts.
Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech, the show where we talk about everything from the light bulb at the top of the tower to the microphone. I messed the order of that up. We're not going to start again. We're just going to, you can reverse that in your mind if you want to. Hey, I'm Kirk Harnack, delighted to be here, confused as I am. I'm in the Telos Alliance studio in Nashville, Tennessee. It is a hot one out there. We're going to get a weather report from our other people on the show in just a minute, but it is 97 degrees and about 197% humidity. I think they call it, it's 190 proof humidity outside. My co-host is here, Chris Tarr. Chris, welcome in. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you too. And I'm guessing that the 190% humidity, I think that might be, are you exaggerating? I think that might be a little bit of an exaggeration.
Well, I restated it as proof, as whiskey proof, 40% whiskey is 80 proof, right? So it's 190 proof.
I don't know anything about alcohol. I don't know what you're talking about. All I know is Diet Coke, and that's all I ever have. I am here in the Chris Tarr cave, the Magnum Media office of Chris Tarr, and it's got to be, it was 99 yesterday, 98 today, so same thing going on here. Of course, we had some huge storms coming through last night, so I spent a good part of the evening randomly working on different sites that got little bugaboos going on because of the weather. Fortunately, not too horrible. So we made it through okay. Everybody's back on the air, and we didn't have any major damage, knock on wood. So that was good. Everything good everything here is good, and glad to be here today.
Well, glad you're here. And I'm glad also that our guest is here. Chris, you and I are going to have a great time with our guest, because we always do. It is Chuck Kelly. Chuck, welcome in. Great to see you,
Thanks,
man.
Kirk. Good to see you, Kirk. Good to see you, Doc, in Mukwonago. I'm sitting here in my office studio in Noblesville, Indiana, just a little north of Indianapolis. And it's a hot day here. It did hit 100 yesterday, and it is probably in the mid-90s as we speak. So nice to be inside, nice for the advent of air conditioning.
I was talking with my daughter, Audrey, who at the moment is living here in the house with me, and she's a nurse. She works at Williamson Medical Center, and she said that they did have a heat death yesterday in the emergency room. So, yeah. And I understand that Vanderbilt Hospital had, I believe, had at least one death and some people really sick. So, be careful out there. Be careful out there. It is some kind of hot.
It's not just the heat, it's the humidity, too.
Yeah, I said, 190 proof here in Nashville.
Yeah.
But that is a good reminder for engineers out in the field. Stay hydrated, and don't go out and do work unless you need to. Give it a couple of days. There is nothing that is that important that you need to risk your life for. So, if you're going out to do some work, bring some Gatorade with you. Keep yourself hydrated and take it easy. It's really easy to kind of lose track of what you're doing and get yourself in trouble with the heat.
What does amaze me, and one reason to be careful, is that perfectly smart, capable people who may be in reasonable physical shape have succumbed to heat stress and heat stroke without and they didn't do it on purpose. Nope. It overcame them. Chuck.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Go ahead, Kurt. I was gonna say is, and we tend to, as engineers, we tend to go in the worst conditions and think we're invincible, and pride ourselves on getting things done, and it's just totally not worth it.
I think, just like I'm told, if you freeze to death, like in water or something, the first thing you do is you feel warm, you feel comfortable, and then you fade away. I'm thinking that heat stroke is probably a similar thing. It reminds me of Dean Martin's old quote. He says, "I know my limit with alcohol. I just lose control before I reach it."
Oh, God. Wow. Hey, I just brought up. I was curious about. Okay, this day. What is today? Today's June 16th. Yeah, and this is the high temperatures for June 16th from the long-term climatological measuring that they do in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And there's about 10 sites in Tennessee. But you can bring this up at, maybe you can even see it on the screen, realclimatetools.com. realclimatetools.com. And you can look at every, all of the thousands of readings that they have for a given location. Now, this is not your local airport. These are typically high quality, long-term climate stations that are recognized for having good data. And the highest highs were, looks like back in the late 40s, early 50s. And of course they had the highest temperatures back in the Dust Bowl days around 1933. And we had some recent high temperatures in, looks like about 2012 or about 2010, 2012 or so. But anyway, that's realclimatetools.com. And you can find your state and location and kind of see how things are trending for you. It may be different than your National Weather Service record high, record low, because that'll be based on the airport reading, or the reading at the Weather Service, which is probably not the long-term high-quality climatological reading for your area. So I know there's a lot of different data sets out there. Hey, our show This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you in part by Ray Top over at Radio Guide. Radio-guide.com is his website. You can go there. You can sign up to get the paper magazine like I do. And, Chuck, what I like about this is there's room for longer articles and more explanation and pictures and everything. Radio Guide comes out 6 times a year, but has longer articles. You read this thing ever, Chuck?
I do, all the time. You bet.
Yeah. Good stuff. Also, our show is brought to you in part, before we get into the meat and potatoes here, by our friends at Nautel. And Nautel, they're done with the webinars for this month, for June. They're going to announce some more in July. We've got a quick flash video here for you. We'll be right back.
One of the other things that we wanted to talk about was site hardening, and this is just something I grabbed out of a YouTube video. Somebody throwing a freezing rain shield over their heat pump at their house, but it's really not something that, especially in cold weather country, that you laugh at too hard, because having ice come off a tower and punch through the roof of a building can make a heck of a mess.
So at Nautel, they want you to know that they got a new series of transmitters called their VX series. I had to talk to them about that because at Telos we've got a line of telephone equipment called VX. But the VX series, is a new range of transmitters. They're analog FM transmitters, and they range from about 150 watts up to 5 kilowatts. They're very modular in their style. There we go. 150 watts to 5 kilowatt analog FM rack mount transmitters. So a new range there with, what's interesting is you can replace the amplifier pallets without a soldering iron. And that's kind of interesting. Very interesting, actually. Also, the power supplies are easily swappable there. So thanks a lot to Nautel. We'll let you know when Nautel is going to be returning to their Transmission Talk Tuesday roundtable discussions. And that'll be sometime in July. We'll have that information for you. Okay, let's roll on to the show. Chuck Kelly is here. Chris Tarr is here. And Chuck, you and I were talking, I guess it was just yesterday, about an idea that has come along in your world. I guess, Chuck, it'd be probably appropriate for you to tell us what's going on in your world. We knew you for years as somebody who worked with Nautel and also worked with ITC3M, and also somebody who worked with Elenos. And in each case, you find the best things to promote. You help us engineers understand the technologies that are involved in the products that you're representing. And I feel like I've gotten great education from you.
That's high praise. Thanks.
Yeah, well,
so
sincere. Yeah.
I retired in February, and but it doesn't mean I'm sitting on my hands. I became a consultant, as a lot of us do, who retire from the biz on a day-to-day basis, allowing me to do things that I want to do on my time schedule. And I'm consulting about 5 different companies at the moment. And one of them that I'm consulting is a company from Texas that had an interesting concept. They don't sell this product. They don't sell tower lights. They sell you a service, and they come out and take care of all of that for you. They call it tower lighting as a service. And what intrigued me about that is there's a lot of that stuff going on where you don't buy a product, you buy a service. In fact, you could even say that radio, as a general rule, has more and more and more begun to outsource engineering. And that's what happens when you have consult or contract engineers is you've outsourced engineering. And I think it's really interesting because can coincide with that outsourcing of the engineering role. The engineer was the guy that was responsible for making sure that your tower and your tower lights were in compliance with the FAA and FCC regulations. And if you have a contract engineer, at least in my view, it gets kind of hazy as to who's responsible. Legally, the FAA and the FCC is going to say it's the licensee of the tower, or the people that own the tower. But, ostensibly, it's been the engineer that kind of watched the tower lights, make sure they were on, and sent off the NOTAMs if they were necessary. And these days, I think there's a lot of stations where the general manager is probably effectively the one who's responsible, but I bet you he doesn't know much about tower lights and what the regulations are. And so that intrigued me, that whole concept of kind of changing the way stations work was interesting to me. So I've gotten involved with this organization. I'm helping them out.
I want to delve more into that relationship with contract engineers and, let's say, general managers and owners, because there is a lot of room for some fuzziness there. But also, if we can bring a 3-shot back in with Chris too, I was thinking about all the things that we now farm out that we didn't used to. And I mean some basic things. For example, when I was a kid, I'd go visit my grandpa. They had their own water well, right? A lot of folks, I've had houses that had their own septic system, but most people want to pay somebody else to take that waste away and deal with it, right? So water is something that you farm out to others when in municipal situations. Sewer is trash pickup. People used to burn trash in their own backyard, an old 55-gallon rusty drum, right? They'd burn their trash, or they'd bury their trash, or some people throw it in the creek out, in the back 40. More closer to home, generator maintenance. We used to do that ourselves, or many stations have in the past. We found out that, guess what? There are people who are qualified to do that, who do a better job, who know how to test. They have the dry loads to test things. They have all the tools on the truck to test the generator and can certify that it works and the oil was changed and all that kind of stuff. Chris and Chuck, can you think of some other things in our lives that we farm out now that we maybe didn't used to?
Sure. Look at tower management. Look at how many groups are selling off towers to American Tower, places like that. And one of the reasons, and I was been involved with this several times. One of the reasons you do that is because broadcasters aren't tower managers. Now, we used to handle that in the past, but then there's the maintenance and the taxes and all those things that we're not really specialists in, that those tower companies are. It's much easier to let somebody else deal with that and simply lease the space. And is kind of alluding to what Chuck was saying earlier with tower lights. Not only do I have my own stations, but I do contract engineering for other stations. And you're absolutely right. In the stations that I contract for, there's a lot of gray area on who's checking tower lights. I've showed them how to do it, and they know, but I really have no idea if the general manager is dialing up the transmitter site every day to monitor and make sure the tower lights are on. I'm not sure. I can be responsible for my sites, and I am, but there are a lot of places where I'm sure that isn't getting done. And how many times have we driven by towers to see that there are lights out and, there's not NOTAMs filed for it. So, that happens a lot in our industry with trying to outsource things. And with that comes that peril because we're self-regulating. So it's really
Exactly.
hard to kind of give up that control, but then also, say, yeah, no, we're definitely following the rules.
Well, one of the things this company does, and it intrigued me, is they've got 3 network operation centers that are constantly monitoring all of the sites that they own the lights on, and they are checking current on those lights to make sure they're working perfectly. And if they don't work perfectly, 2 things happen right away. First is the NOTAM is sent. They notify the government that those lights, as is required, are not working at the moment. And secondly, they dispatch a team out at no cost to you to fix that. And I find that fascinating. I think that's a really cool idea because you're right, Doc, that we as broadcast engineers don't really have the time to become experts in this. And, the regulations are changing all the time. Most recently, November 2020, the FAA changed regulations on tower lights for broadcasters. And as you change things, you can be grandfathered, but as you change things, you got to have IR because there's pilots flying around out there with infrared hoods, and they can't see the normal red lights. The spectrum is not right, so there's regulations out there for that. So fascinating stuff. A fast-changing industry that I'm not sure we as broadcast engineers have had the time to stay abreast of.
Chuck, keep your powder dry for a second, but yesterday you painted a picture for me in our conversation yesterday, and I'd like you to, when we come back from a quick announcement, I'd like you to repaint that for our whole audience,
Okay.
the possible, a pretty scary horror story situation that could easily come about these days, easily. And, I'm going to tease it with that. Okay. This week in Radio Tech, our show here with Chuck Kelly and Chris Tarr. I'm Kirk Harnack in Nashville, Tennessee, and our show is brought to you in part by my friends at Broadcast Bionics. Really innovative stuff, and here's someone to tell you about Broadcast Bionics.
Welcome to the Bionic Studio. The Bionic Studio brings all audience interaction to the fingertips of a production team in radio, TV, and podcast. Our workflow-led system is working 24/7 around the world for small broadcasters and national and international networks. Our telephony module, Bionic Talk Show, allows cost-effective centralization, remote operation, scalability, and resilience across an entire network of stations, but at the same time is used in single-studio self-op environments. Social media curation and activity is now considered a broadcast-critical part of programming. Bionic Social means the studio isn't overwhelmed with a wall of interaction from an ever-growing number of social platforms. We combine SMS, MMS, and email together with a speech-to-text service for listeners using smart speakers. We enable studio teams to curate, filter, and display all platforms in one place, and post text, images, and video content to multiple platforms in one operation. Effortless collection of video content with Bionic Director has helped position some of the world's most successful stations as leaders in viral content, generating appointments to listen and free marketing via retweets and shares. Bionic Contest enables end-to-end tracking of on-air competitions, live reads, and prizes. These could be on-air contests, automated SMS entry, or online. Anywhere, and Skype TX for Radio brings high-quality audio and video contribution into the studio with ease. No need for dedicated PCs to run different applications. Everything is controlled within the Bionic Studio UI, and incoming connections are visible to users along with all other platforms. Our codec integration enables connection, algorithm configuration, and directory to a wide range of IP and ISDN codecs. The Bionic Studio, a unique suite of products designed to enable your talent to work smarter.
Indeed, and a smarter talent is almost always a good thing. Check out the Bionic Studio, talk show, social, director, and contest, all from Broadcast Bionics. You can go to their website at bionic.radio. Radio's a top-level domain name, bionic.radio, and check out their stuff. Really clever, good stuff. Thanks a lot, Bionics, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. All right, Kirk Harnack here, along with Chris Tarr and Chuck Kelly. Chuck, man, you told me a story. You painted a picture for me yesterday, and I'm telling you, Chuck, the hair on the back of my neck stood up because it was so believable and real. What scenario?
Well, it actually has its roots in fact. I know stations that have had this type of thing happen. So I was imagining a scenario. I'm speaking to a general manager of a station. He's home on a Friday night. He's had a hard week, but it's been good. He's sitting there with an adult beverage, sitting in his lounge chair, and he's got his cell phone next to him, and it goes off. And it's the board op at the station saying, I think the station's off the air, but I can't reach our contract engineer. So you run out to the car, you jump in the car. It's a 10-minute drive to the transmitter site, but it seems like 10 hours when you're off the air. And he gets to the transmitter site, and it's all dark, and he doesn't really know why. And he gets out, and he sees that the tower has fallen down, that there's pieces of tower sections and feed line and guy wires and everything all over the place, and you can't really see. There's some other stuff too, but he can't really see. So he goes back to the car, grabs a flashlight, goes out in the field, starts looking around, and there's when he finds the small airplane next to the tower. And his knees go weak, and then all the police and fire trucks and all that start showing up. And his contract engineer shows up too and says, I saw that there was a problem with the tower lights last week, but I thought I'd put it on my list of things I was going to do this week to check the controller, because sometimes that thing gets flaky. And you can imagine what happens starting that point in time. Not only do you have federal sanctions as a result of what happened, but you've got civil lawsuits, and your station is off the air for a very long time. And I think it's scary, because these days it's very possible that this type of thing could happen.
Formerly one of my radio stations was in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and it wasn't my station in the past, but I want to say back in the 50s, maybe early 60s, that happened to a station in Clarksdale, Mississippi. The tower lights were off, and a plane hit the tower. Yeah,
and we all remember Tower Road down in Houston, right? You remember that?
Yeah, tell me
that
about
was
that.
That was a major tower complex with a whole bunch of stations on it. An airplane hit it. And we were all at NAB, and there were broadcast engineers killed, if I remember the story. And just a hideous, awful situation.
So what you described is a situation that and as Chris mentioned it too, when you have a contract engineer or even a full-time engineer, but if it's a full-time engineer, that person's probably going to, part of their job is take responsibility for notifying the FCC if you're down in power or off the air or need an STA, and notifying the FAA if you have a tower light problem. But if you've got a contract engineer, that line may be very blurry. What is at my radio station? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and with the reliability of today's transmitters, regardless of the brand, I mean, how often does a contract engineer go to the site? And if he's not going to the site, how is he going to see whether the lights are on or off?
It so happens that my own radio stations, even though I do most of the engineering, my business partner, Larry, is the one who actually takes the tower light readings, and he would be the one to notify the FAA to establish a NOTAM if the lights went out, and he has certainly done that numerous times.
But you're very lucky. You've got a partner who's technically competent. I know Larry, and he knows what he's looking for, and he's probably up to date with the regs on it. But how many times does that happen around the United States?
So,
well, here's the thing: is
go ahead.
The last thing you want is to as soon as something happens where somebody gets hurt or something gets damaged, you have all kinds of 3-lettered agencies showing up in your parking lot, and that is the last thing you want. And the other thing to note is, and this has been cropping up more and more, is the FAA and the FCC are looking at every tenant on the tower as being shared. That if you're on that tower, you should know. And so there's certainly the possibility that even if it's not your tower, that somehow you can share partial liability for that. So even if you're not 100% liable, or it's not your tower, you should at least know the answers to those questions. You should be able to say, well, this station does this, or in the case of what I typically do, and most tower companies will do this, is they have something in writing that will say that we're responsible 100% for monitoring the tower light system. And we know like ATC has flash technologies that monitors their stuff, I believe. And, so there are ways to make sure that you're covered in this situation, but, absolutely need to know the answers to those questions. And, again, I mean, the minute that something happens, like that, you are going to be in, I don't want to say serious trouble, but it's going to be pressure, and you're going to have those answers. So it's best to make sure you never get to that situation.
Absolutely.
So Chuck,
Chuck,
you're working. Yeah, go ahead, Chuck.
I was just going to say the other thing that these folks would stress is that because you've got somebody, just like what we've been talking about in outsourcing, because you've got somebody who specializes in this specific area, not only do they do it better, but it can often be cheaper than if you're doing it yourself. And they talk about, calculating all the costs of all the things one has to do to maintain your own system versus what they're offering, and it can be as much as 50% cheaper. Plus, the advantage is you don't have any surprises. You don't have a top
right. It's
beacon go out. And
it almost seems like a good. Yeah, I mean, it almost seems like a good insurance policy too. I mean, the violation probably covers a lot of that service. So I could see where that's pretty intriguing. I've never heard of this before, but I can certainly see the advantages of that.
Yeah.
So Chuck,
it's a fascinating thing.
Let's say that I have, and in Mississippi and Arkansas, I'm part owner of several towers,
Sure.
and some. I think some have strobes and some have red lights, which I think have mostly been converted to LEDs. But anyway, the company that you're consulting with, how does this work? Did they take over my existing lighting system, or did they do something else?
They rip it down and put up their own. They buy the lights from Dialight, and they put it all in, and they put their own controller in, and they set up connectivity between that controller and their knock. They come out and check the lenses, because that's required to be checked on a regular basis. They have drones that they can fly. They check they go up more than halfway up the tower and check your tower painting. They do all of that stuff to make sure that you stay in compliance with things that you probably aren't normally used to dealing with.
Huh. So they install a new lighting system. I'm guessing technically they own it. What more details could I understand about our contractual arrangement with a company that's providing lighting on a piece of steel that probably I own?
You've got a 5-year contract with them. You're going to pay them X amount a month for 5 years, and they own the system. They got two ways they can do it. They will guarantee the rate stays even for 5 months, and even through a renewal of another 5 years, and through another 5 years. But in addition to that, there's another option. You can either just re-up that same thing, or you can buy the towers at the end of the 5 year, or the tower lights at the end of the 5 years for $1. So there's all kinds of different ways to handle this. But I think that the interesting part is, let's talk about the scenario you mentioned yesterday, where you were thinking that there was a tower light at the top of the tower that had failed. The guy goes up there and he finds that it's no longer being made, and you got to get a new one, and it's going to be $15,000 or something crazy because they're no longer being made. Yeah, and all of that goes away because there's no surprises. There's no big pay at the beginning. You're basically converting a CapEx into an OpEx, capital expenditure into an operating expenditure.
Chris, have you ever been surprised by like a strobe repair or replacement bill? I sure have, and fortunately, I my own towers that I'm part owner of hasn't been too bad. But I've engineered for some stations that it took the tower crew 2, 3, 4 trips to get it fixed right. And each trip, it's climbing 600, 700, 800 feet up the tower, whatever it was at the time, and the bill was enormous each time.
Sure.
Tens of thousands of dollars to, fix this strobe or that strobe or this controller or whatever trigger, flash unit, capacitors, and all that may be going on. How about your experience? surprises?
Oh, absolutely. And first of all, we also have to remind the audience that you own the part that doesn't make any money. You always like
Yeah,
to say
that's
that.
right.
Of the radio station. Um, but yeah, well, I just had a situation like that where I had a top beacon out at a tower, and we tried replacing the beacon, and it turned out that we had to replace the wiring. That the wiring was old, and they used the wrong kind of wiring when they put it up there, and UV cracked it, and so I mean that was quite an expense, and it took several climbs to get that fixed. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And not only that, but then, again, we're all expected to be, experts in tower lighting, experts in electrical, experts in tower maintenance, experts in all these different things, as well as fix the printer and keep the radio station on the air. So,
and the chair in the control room.
right. Yeah, exactly. I got to fix the wheels on the chair, so yeah, I mean, that's why I find this so intriguing is first of all, I'm surprised nobody's done it before. But secondly, I can certainly see where, there's some benefit there as well, because yeah, I mean, I spent quite a bit of money, just trying to that one beacon and, extending NOTAMs over and over. And, it was kind of a mess. So to not deal with that would have been wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting whole thing. It just intrigued me. I've spent my entire life selling stuff from cart machines to transmitters and whatnot, but this is a whole different deal. I'm not doing that. I'm not even in sales. I'm just trying to figure out how to explain this to broadcasters.
Something that U.S. American broadcasters probably haven't experienced to the extent that European and Australian broadcasters have, and that is transmission as a service. Because when you're a DAB station, there's usually a third party or a consortium of stations that go in together, and everybody pays a fee to be on the DAB. What do they call it? Carousel? I don't know. There's
Multiplex.
some word, multiplex. Thank you. Because it's not reasonable for each person to own their own gear because it's all multiplex together. So that's kind of transmission as a.
I think we're going there. I think we're going there, my friend. Anyway, regardless of all the rest, when you go to an SBE meeting and you see the number of people with gray hair or no hair, you realize that we are going away, and the only way that broadcasters continue on is broadcast transmission as a service, which I think is going to come down the road, and that's going to incorporate not only the transmitter manufacturers and the support organizations there, but field engineers, and it's going to happen. It's got to be more efficient and less expensive.
Well, we're getting that way. I mean, even now, we're the FCC and even station owners see the benefit in combining transmitters at sites. You have these sites where there's a lot of combining going on. AM sites are doing that. It's really not a huge step to then hire somebody between all the group of stations to have somebody there to be the general maintenance person or the general technician for all of those transmitters and all of those stations. Right. I believe several years ago there was a test by, I think it might have been iHeart or Cumulus at the time, with sharing of some engineers. So I think that is coming down the pike, especially in areas like where you're at and where I'm at, and I guess even where Kirk is at, where you're kind of getting into rural areas, and I've been talking about this for a while now, where if I don't do the work, this contract work, there's nobody else here, period, in this part of the state. I am it. And, as much as I really would rather not do this stuff, sometimes I have to step in because these stations don't have a choice. I mean, if they're off the air, if I don't help them out. So, but I do see what you're saying there with this things as a service. It took a long time for station owners to give up towers. They believe that, well, this is key to our business, and I don't want to give up that control. But then you look at the savings, making that an operating cost and a fixed cost every month versus what are my taxes going to be this year, or the roof caved in on the building, or whatever. But there are some places where you pretty much have to keep that site, and therefore you are responsible for those tower lights, and that, because there are some cases where maybe you're getting a lot of revenue, or, it's a critical site that you really just don't want to leave control of. But even still, that gets back to, managing tower lights and managing property. I mean, there are companies out there now that you hire just to manage things like mowing the lawn and checking the building out. Here it's Tower MRL that can take care of those sorts of things. But I've never heard of something where they actually even take care of the lighting, or provide the lighting and everything, which makes all the sense of the world, because you don't want to have to deal with replacing those things.
Exactly.
It's really interesting how how our thinking expands when services become available, right? Now, one thing that broadcasters have been doing forever, that we're kind of outsourcing something, is radio network news, right? That's been going on forever. As a kid, I listened to either Paul Harvey or I forget who else, but top of the hour news, bottom of the hour news, and we could do that ourselves, and some big city news stations do, but oftentimes you'll have CBS do that or NPR if you're an NPR station.
How many people are outsourcing weather?
Yeah, exactly. Outsourcing weather, outsourcing Casey Kasem, American Top 40, where back in the day, right? That was an outsourced, 4-hour show? And now we outsource all kinds of shows. I mean, several morning shows on my stations are outsourced. Murphy, Sam, and Jody are on in Mississippi and in Hawaii. On a delay.
Well,
in Hawaii.
There are even situations where, you're in markets where you have the competing company's morning show from a different market on through syndication. So those lines are starting to get blurred. It used to be where we never even acknowledge the competition to, hey, we all have the same goal here, and we need to start thinking about that. So that's where that whole we're starting to move in that direction of things as a service in broadcasting, but it has been such a competitive business for so long that it's really hard to give up that that control.
Hey,
it's interesting.
Go ahead, Chuck. Final thought.
This one's a lengthy one. Go ahead and take your break.
We're going to take a break, but I was curious, Chris, among the stations that you work for at Magnum Media, a lot of stations, especially back in, 70s, 80s, even the 90s, let's say that your competitor was Hot 97 FM. Well, if the temperature outside was 97, you couldn't say it. It would never be 97 degrees on your station because your competitor's nice. But now there are so many stations crammed on the FM dial. There's a lot of temperatures that it can't be.
I was going to say, you'd never say the temperature if that was the case.
At least not on FM anyway, not in the summertime.
Right.
Oh, well. Hey, this week in Radio Tech, Kirk Harnack, if you're laughing, having a good time, it's because Chris Tarr and Chuck Kelly are here making the show wonderful. I'm glad you could join us. Tell your friends, if you would, about this week in Radio Tech. And hey, if you're watching us on the YouTube, why don't you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and subscribe to the show, hit the little bell, and it'll notify you when we've posted a new episode. We do the show live on Thursdays at 5 Eastern time, typically. And then we usually have it posted on YouTube about a day later, 24 hours later, something like that. So anyway, make sure that you get notified and tell your friends about it. This Week in Radio Tech this week is brought to you by Broadcasters General Store, and something that they carry, and that's the whole line from Broadcast Tools. Don Wingett and his incredibly useful equipment from Broadcast Tools. I've been using their stuff for, oh my goodness, for probably 30 plus years, doing satellite switching and I'll just, oh my gosh, contact closures and things like that. Well, one thing that Don Wingett and Broadcast Tools has, and they've had it for a while here, but it's always worth looking at, and that is this little audio console. It's the ProMix 4. This thing is so useful because you can put it in voiceover studios. You can take it to a live remote, to a sports broadcast, to a sporting event. You can do it from the car dealer remote. And it's got a couple of features that make it easy for your talent, your on-air talent, to take to a remote site and hook it up and use it. First of all, it's mono. There's no left and right stereo to worry about. It's mono. It's meant for your voice to go through, and that's going to be mono. It's got easy on-off buttons, just an easy rotary pot on each fader. It has a built-in limiter. If you want to engage that, you can engage the limiter so that, when that jock on-air talent gets excited, it's not going to blow out whatever scheme you're using to get it back to the station. And speaking of that, schemes to get it back to the station, it's got a USB codec in it, if you will. It's got a USB audio interface. You can plug this thing right up to your laptop, use whatever program in the laptop you want to use, like Clean Feed or any of the commercial products out there that are available. You can make a SIP phone call if you want to do that from your laptop. This console will handle XLR inputs or quarter-inch tip ring sleeve. It's got headphone outputs with built-in headphone amps for 3 different talent there. It's even got a tally light that if you do have it hooked up like in a studio, you can have a tally light come on. That's something you can't do with the other, with the non-broadcast style consoles that are out there. It also has an IFB audio input with level adjustment and a button on the main number 1 microphone to talk back over the IFB. So it's got all that kind of stuff built in, and it also has mix minus. So you can hook a codec up to this. You can hook that Bluetooth gizmo from or gadget from Angry Audio up to it, and put your phone calls on the air with that from your cell phone. So many things you can do with this console. It's rugged, easy to connect up, and sounds great. So check it out. It's from Broadcast Tools. It's called the Pro Mix 4, and you get this thing from our friends at Broadcasters General Store. I was just talking to BGS yesterday. What good people they are. Oh, they have a new revamped website. It's even prettier than before. Thank you for doing that. You can call them at 352-622-7700. If you haven't made note of that phone number yet, stick it in your head or put it in your little black book or in your phone at 352-622-7700, and or go to their website, their new revamped website at bgs.cc. Thanks a lot, Broadcast General Store and Broadcast Tools, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. All righty, we are moving on here with Chris Tarr and Chuck Kelly. Chuck, any more to talk about this tower lighting as a service, or have we, you had something else you wanted to add to this?
I wanted to pick up on what Chris said about how stations are combining on one AM tower. As it happens, in the last couple of weeks, I was over in Asia, and one of the things I was doing was consulting for a company that makes it possible to do multiplexing multiple AM stations on a single tower. And it's become really interesting because it may not be the same in your markets, but I'm finding that there's a lot of AM stations that are going dark because the land under the towers is worth more than the station is. And the 50 kilowatt in our community here in Indianapolis, they knocked all the towers down. We don't have a 50 kilowatt in Indianapolis anymore. And the old WIBC is no more.
Yeah, and you're seeing more and more of that with, and before I even get to that, I know, we've talked about that where, every once in a while somebody says, hey, Doc, what about translators and AMs going away because of that? I don't think that's happening anytime soon, but you are seeing AMs that have complicated arrays that also have translators that are reducing power to get down to one tower and selling off some of that land, or just the maintenance costs of maintaining that difficult directional array, where they've said, we don't even need nighttime service anymore. We'll do, we had a station here just down the road that went from a 3-tower, 25 kilowatts, 3-tower to 250 watts daytime only on a single tower because, the translator covers what they need to cover. So, but even then, you're seeing these AMs who, and WIBC may be one of those that'll look at that, is maybe going on a different tower just to keep the license and diplexing. We have, there's that group up in Minnesota that's like quadplexing. They've got 4 AMs. So yeah, I mean, all of that is becoming more and more common. And we have a situation here in Milwaukee where competing AMs are sharing towers. It is just getting to be that kind of a world in this business.
And I find that totally fascinating because where I was in Asia, people knew that the equation of the cost of the land under the towers versus the value of the station. And so they were considering shutting stations off. They didn't know that there was an option to actually use one tower in a market, move everybody there, sell all the real estate for the other stations, and share the money. And they all come out ahead. It's a win-win. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about, though, is a little bit of a leap of faith into the future. We all know that television went through a repack, and it was made possible by the digitalization of television. In the not too terribly distant future, we may have a repack in radio. And that is, as the percentage of cars that have FM HD radios in them goes up. We may get to all digital on FM HD, which allows quite a substantial number of stations to be on one FM station. And therefore, we could actually have a repack. We could outsource our transmission to one transmission systems, broadcast transmission as a service. And that's just dreaming in the future, but it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I know we've had groups of people kind of did a think tank on that and brainstorming on that. The hardest part, I think, is just getting over the certain classes of stations. And they had that with when they converted to DAB as well, where, this Class A all of a sudden gets to have the same signal as my Class C because we're sharing facilities or whatever. But, I have seen the tests with Nautel where they're, doing all of these digital channels on a single carrier. It's really impressive how that's happening. And, I do think that, in the future, as things move forward, that's certainly a possibility. Obviously, the sticking point right now is that there's no incentive to do it. I mean, you can stay analog as long as you want, and there's no requirement to do HD, but there are some efficiencies there. And, I have even seen what you're talking about, where even with FMs, all of a sudden, competitors start to play nice because there is some savings there for these groups to play together, and I mean, it's always kind of been the situation in engineering. I mean, the engineers have always secretly gotten along just fine and have shared things quietly. And, that's always kind of been the situation. But I think now even the group owners are realizing we're all in the same boat here. And, the rising tide lifts everybody. So let's work together. We've seen that with, the standards with RDS and Albumart and all these different things where broadcasters are starting to work together to achieve those goals. So you're right. I think that, I think there's a lot of people who hear this right now in the audience who are going, that, we are never going to do that. We are never going to give in. HD radio is dead. It's not, I think you're right. It's one of those dream things, but I think inevitably, and it probably won't be in our lifetime, but I think inevitably that'll be what happens is everything goes to digital. We use a smaller amount of spectrum, get all the stations in there. And it makes a lot of sense financially. It makes a lot of sense technically, and just resource wise.
And it's interesting because we as broadcasters are competing against webcasters, right? We're competing against people that don't have to have a transmitter. They can just set up a computer and play their very targeted format. And we are, because we're limited in spectrum, we have to use more of a more broad format. And I'm thinking that it might make possible in some situations the ability to have many more content channels in free over-the-air broadcasting, which allows radio to compete more head-to-head with these web-based broadcasters.
Oh, sure. Well, we talk about it with our group that, we don't necessarily compete with other radio stations. I mean, we do, but really the competition is webcasters, digital radio, all of those sorts of things are also very big competitors to us. So we kind of secretly root for our competition because we want, for our radio competition, because we want radio to thrive and to survive. And that requires, as you said, all of this different content. And I think you're right. I think at some point we start working even closer together as a united front, radio versus everything else. And that's where I think all of those things are going to start to change.
It's interesting. You remind me of a situation that happened quite a number of years ago in a market in Southeast Asia. And they had a situation where modulation levels on FM were completely out of control. 200, 300% was typical. And they were always trying to out loud the next guy over. I mean, it was like what we had here, but on steroids. And the problem was, of course, that the audio quality was horrible because the IF bandwidth of the receivers was fixed, ceramic filters, whatever. And as a result, it just sounded like crap. And so I got up in front of this group of broadcasters at one point in time, and I said, I said, who's your competitor? This was the owners of the stations. I said, who's your competitor? They all pointed at each other. I said, wrong. In those days, their competitor was newspapers. The newspapers got 60% of the advertising revenue. And here they are killing themselves over the remainder. And I said, we need to focus on what the competition is and improve the quality of our product so that we can take on newspapers. Well, now the newspapers are gone, and we're dealing with all these digital media.
Well, we are the only industry that takes our final product and destroys it, squashes it, clips it, does all that, purposely just destroys whatever it is we do before we give it to the consumer. We're the only people who do that.
Oh, now wait a minute. I must say, I listen to a lot of podcasts and podcast clips, best ofs and things like that. And the quality is all over the map. And there are podcasts that I can't listen to in a noisy driving environment. And I know which ones they are because they're not audio processing. Now, yeah, Chris, you make a great point. People, love to turn it up and in the wrong way and destroy that audio. And there's certainly plenty of that we've all heard. But that's not what we should be using processing for. We should use processing to make whatever our audio is easier to partake of, easier to consume in the environments that our listeners are going to be consuming it in. So
I remember visiting a station in New York City, an FM station in New York City, and the chief engineer, who will remain nameless, took me over to his mod monitor and showed me that the needle never moved. It sat at whatever number it was, and it never moved. And he was proud of that.
Here we are buying boxes to crank up our, the Nielsen watermarking. I mean, we purposely, and we think that we're being competitive. Now, a lot of my stations, and I'm not going to take credit for my own because there are others that do this, but I still process pretty aggressively, but it's not as compressed, and honestly, it stands out from the dial a whole lot more. But we end up doing all of these things thinking that we make ourselves happy. We have no clue what it's doing to the person on the other side of the radio who doesn't really, in a lot of ways, give much thought to those things. And Bob Orban had a great thing. You can always turn up the volume, but you can't turn down the compression. So I think that's where what you said was great, Chuck, with standing up and going, who's your competition? The newspapers don't print their print bigger and bigger and bigger every day and get into this war like that. We do that. We listen to the guy across town and crank it up even more because they're louder. And it just doesn't. People don't care. And we need to get out of that mindset that that's who we're competing against, because we're not. And it's I'm getting off my soapbox now, but.
Can you imagine a newspaper saying, "Yeah, our paper's better because we've got the tightest kerning in the business"?
That's right. We're big, larger than life.
That's right. The letters close together. But I think we all get that. And hey, with streaming, there's some great streams out there. I happen to like my own streams, and I'm processing them with a 3-band processor from my employer. And I love it. A couple of them I process with the Omnia 9 style processing, but they're not cranked up because, well, first of all, that's not good for streaming. But there are plenty of stations I'd prefer the stream over what they're doing on the air, over the FM air.
I think in terms of audio processors these days, they are toolboxes. They're audio toolboxes, and it's not which model toolbox you've got. It's how clever are you and how dedicated you are to getting the sound you want out of that box.
Well, there are two analogies that I always, there are two analogies I always use with processing. First of all, is it's like salt. A little bit makes your dish really tasty. A whole lot ruins it. Yeah. And the second thing is we can all get the same processors. So we all can get the same ingredients. It's the chef that knows what to do with those ingredients. So, it's really easy. It was just like, and I think that analogy may have come back from Bill Drake in his programming days, where he said, we got a lot of people across the country who come and listen to us and listen to what we're doing, and they go back and try to copy it. Well, you can copy the things that we do on the air, but you have no idea why or how we do it. And, that kind of goes along with that as well.
You're right.
Good point. point. Hey, we're coming to this part of the show where Chuck Kelly doesn't know it yet, but he's going to regale us with a great tip or a story or something. And Chris Tarr might have one as well. That'll be. They've got about 2.5 minutes to come up with something like that. Right now, our show This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you in part by this piece of wire that comes apart. It's the headphone disconnector from Angry Audio. This is a great device. Your talent gets up, walks away. They still have their headphones around. And guess what? They're not going to destroy the jack or the cord. It's just going to come apart like this. So check this out from angryaudio.com. And Angry Audio, I love what Mike Dosh has done here. Mike Dosh saw that the Studio Hub line was going to go out of business, that it wasn't going to be available. So Mike Dosh went and bought the thing. He bought the jigs, the factory processes, the inventory, and now Angry Audio is responsible for the Studio Hub Plus line of things like wiring adapters. These will make wiring your studio so much easier, especially if, these days you're using one of the digital audio over IP systems, and typically on the back of their equipment, they're going to have an RJ45 jack in the Studio Hub standard for audio in and out. And that's what these are. These let you wire things up. Hey, the last studio I wired, I didn't use a soldering iron once, except stupidly forgot to buy the RCA to RJ45 adapter. So I did have to solder some RCAs on there. Dumb me. If only I would have thought ahead a little bit. But they have them in all kinds of different styles. You can get the 1/4 inch tip ring sleeve. And hey, if you've got some AES EBU digital audio, you don't need both sides, although you can just tie one back or cut it off. But they also make at Angry Audio Studio Hub, they make these for AES EBU digital audio or mono audio if you got mono audio. There you go. Check out the cool things they have for you. All the gadgets, the gizmos, and the Studio Hub supplies at angryaudio.com. I can't wait for you to go to the website and check out their stuff. It's really helped. Really helped. Hey, our other sponsor is Max Connect Wireless. Yeah, you too can have all these antennas bristling off your Max Connect box. We'll tell you more about it right after, we got a little testimonial right here.
I'm Gary Morrill, Midwest Regional Director of Engineering for Alpha Media. When I first spoke with Josh Bone about Max Connect, he told me they'd work great for remote transmitter sites where connectivity was a challenge. And he's absolutely right. We even have sites where we're using this as a backup to our STL using Max Connect's dual carrier option, and it works perfectly. We also have times where we need to be able to get out to a venue where it's kind of challenging because everybody and his brother is trying to stream video at the same time, like at a big sporting event. And you know what? Our data gets through every time because it's prioritized packet data. It works for us. It'll work for you. Max Connect. Check it out.
The 4G LTE modem doesn't matter that much. What matters is the SIM cards that are inside this. And right there's the SIM. This one can hold 2 SIM cards. So this one happens to be on AT&T or on Verizon. I can choose whichever one has the better coverage and better speeds where I am. And again, you get prioritized data coverage here from Max Connect Wireless. Oh, and this one, actually other ones too, they have a Wi-Fi hotspot built in. So of course you can wire this into your network at your transmitter side or on a remote site. But if you're like me, I've got those Wise cameras at my transmitter sites to keep an eye on things. They're inexpensive, but they're Wi-Fi only. So you got to use a Wi-Fi hotspot. Well, look at this Wi-Fi hotspot built right in here. So you can hook up your Wise cameras or any other Wi-Fi only devices. Thanks a lot, Max Connect Wireless. Josh Bone. Check him out at maxconnect.com. Yeah, or maxconnectwireless.com. Either one will get you there. Choose your carrier and talk to Josh Bone about getting that hooked up for you. All right, it's time for the tip of the week section, and I bet Chuck Kelly's got something ready for us. Chuck, what can you regale us with?
My favorite specification, or my favorite hint that I've probably told 500 times around the world, is to use a cigarette. And I'm not a smoker, but take a cigarette. When you go to your transmitter site, open the door just a crack, hold the cigarette there, see if the smoke goes in or out. If the smoke goes in, that means you have negative pressure inside the building, and you're starving the air out of your transmitter. You're probably exhausting the air from your transmitter outside, and you have not provided enough air coming in the building. That will cause you all kinds of problems and also increase the amount of dirt and dust in the building. So what you want to see is take a cigarette, see when you open the door, it pushes the air out. The smoke comes out. And that's a winning station. That's one where the transmitter is going to live long and prosper.
Chuck, that's a great idea. I don't carry cigarettes with me, but maybe I should. Maybe a candle could do the same thing. Does the flame blow out or blow in?
Yeah.
But I was at a site, Chuck, where we did the smoke thing. Another engineer brought a little smoke canister thing, and there were 3 puffs of white smoke that came out, and we knew right then that the transmitter had chosen a new chief engineer.
That's wonderful.
I'm sorry. I'm leaving soon, and I'll see myself.
Yeah.
Chris Tarr, what you got for us?
So this is one that we've been working on here in the move up in La Crosse, and it caused me to rethink how we do things. And what we ended up doing is we have La Crosse is a beautiful area, but it's the coulee region. It's got hills and cliffs and valleys and things like that. So it's really hard to get signals around. And the building that we were in had great STL shots to all of our sites as well as data shots. It was perfect. It was right along the river. Everything was clear from there. And our STL gear was in the basement, and we decided we were going to move into a new building. And I looked, and I could get paths from there, but they weren't nearly as good as the building we were in. So what we ended up doing is leasing from the new owner of the building, the basement space. And what we're doing now is our automation systems are in that nice climate controlled basement along with the STLs. And our studios are in a different building. And it took me a long time to get my head around this, but I thought about why not? Why couldn't we do that? Because most of the time, we're not live, we're voice tracked. And so the computers just sit there and do their thing, and they're on a VPN network. And then when we're live, we have a codec that just goes from one building to the other. And thanks to the, audio over IP, it's really easy to switch and put the studio on the air and get the automation system screen back to wherever we're at. So I guess the tip is really, think outside the box. Things don't have to be the way they are because they've been that way. There's really no reason to come up with creative solutions. And again, when I first thought about this, I went, that's just ridiculous. Who does that? But then the more I thought about it is, why aren't they doing that? I mean, this is an ideal place. They're not stuck in a stuffy server room or anything. They're in a place where we can climate control it. We've got great STL shots, and honestly, those things run on their own most of the day. So, we have access to it. We have IP access. Why not? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to move all that stuff to a new building where we may not get as good of a shot as we'd like or anything else, or have that expense of trying to get something mounted on the roof of the building, that sort of thing. So, it was just something that, now that I actually, we finished that project and it's been working great. I look back and I go, yeah, I mean, should have been a no-brainer. But it took me to get out of my radio mind and go, yeah, we don't really need to be in that same building. And I think that's going to be the next step to what we were talking about with radio as a service kind of thing, where I think, we'll get to the point where even our automation just does that, in the cloud and delivers it to wherever we want it to go.
In the words of Bob Dylan, the times they are a-changing.
They are. And being willing to think outside the box, Chris, that's great advice. About 2 years ago, we had a situation in a small town in Mississippi where we lost our lease. We're going to move out of the building that we had been in for about 5 years. And the new building, we weren't going to have an STL shot from the new building. And we would have had to spend a lot of money to build a studio. Well, you know what? We no longer had a local live morning show. And I know that may not be a good thing. I get it. We did replace it with a show that sounds local and is almost live. So that's not, we put the automation at the transmitter site. We've had so little problem now. Oh my gosh, it just executes and it just runs. And of course we can update it. It happens to be at the head end for an ISP. So the connectivity is great. We don't have any problem with that. But Chris Tobin did this for COVID, put the automation system at the transmitter site.
Sure. Well, I mean, the technology has gotten to the point where there's really no reason why you can't do it. I mean, there's just, it's just a box, and it doesn't matter where that box lives as long as you can get to it and you can access it. I mean, what's the difference between a closet in this building or a closet in that building?
I think the only positive thing out of the pandemic is it caused a lot of people to think differently about how to get things done, and I think that's a big benefit.
Very true words.
Things from their living rooms.
Yep, that's a good honest place to stop to close up our podcast. Chuck Kelly, thank you for being with us on short notice, having good ideas. Food for thought. The idea of tower lights as a service, not so different from all the other things that we pay for as a service.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kirk.
All right.
I've enjoyed it.
Chris Tarr, thank you for being with us and contributing mightily to this show. Sure appreciate your efforts. And you may or may not be here next week. I will be here, but we'll see you or not next week.
Yeah, I may be corrupting some new entrants into the business at a transmitter site, and maybe convincing them that this is where they want to go. On the other hand, I am taking them to a transmitter site, so they may decide that's not what they want to be doing.
Is the transmitter site nice and clean, or is it rat and snake infested?
Yeah, actually, it's a nice one. It's one on a bluff, and I purposely picked that one because it's the one that doesn't have the snakes and stuff in it.
Good idea. Good idea. Ease them into the business slowly. Show them the demo first, right? All right. Thanks a lot, both Chuck and Chris, and thanks a lot to our sponsors. Please be sure you patronize them. It's really helpful. Thanks so much to Suncast, who puts together such a great show for us. Great job switching and producing This Week in Radio Tech. And thanks to Andrew Zarian, the founder of the GFQ Network. We'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech.